Days like this, solitude becomes a blessing. No one interferes, no one invades the space where you can dissolve into your thoughts. Returning home after a tiring day, I closed the door behind me and took off my shoes, feeling the fatigue leave my body. Today I especially wanted to relax. I decided to give myself a little home spa ritual. I went into the bathroom and lit a few candles, placing them along the shelves and on the edge of the tub. The flames wavered gently, creating a cozy twilight. Filling the tub with hot water, I added fragrant oil with hints of lavender and rosemary. While the water was running, she put on a silk robe that slid caressingly over her skin and poured herself a glass of wine. The first sips of wine warmed me from the inside out. I could feel the tension slowly receding. When the bath was ready, I took off my robe, sank into the hot water, and closed my eyes. There was an almost ringing silence, broken only by the faint crackling of the candles. Warmth enveloped me, soaking every cell of my body. I slowly massaged my shoulders, feeling the fatigue fade with each touch. Slowly my mind began to wander and my body began to relax, but suddenly, a creak. Barely perceptible, almost insignificant. It could have been a sound caused by the old wooden floor, but it alerted me. I opened my eyes and looked at the door. The gap between the door and the jamb was wide enough for some silhouette to flicker. I tensed, my heart beating faster. Probably a burglar, my mind raced. Or maybe my nephew Tom. He sometimes dropped by unannounced, but why at night? I carefully sat down in the water, not making a sound, and continued to stare at the door. The seconds stretched endlessly until I saw a face. My thoughts came to a standstill. He just stood there, silent and motionless, looking straight at me. His eyes, large and dark, seemed consuming. The look was alien, predatory somehow. "Tom," I breathed out, my voice sounding hoarse and harsh. Instantly, as if caught in the act, he stepped back and disappeared into the darkness. I was left sitting in the bathroom, staring at the door. My thoughts jumbled together in a whirlwind. Why was he standing there? What did he want? When I got out of the water, I quickly threw on my robe, trying to hide from the night's chill, which seemed to be the real embodiment of fear. The bedroom, I thought, would be a safe haven, but the strange feeling of unease still lingered. That night I hardly slept at all. The next morning I went down to the kitchen. Sunlight flooded the room, and it seemed that the night's incident was just a play of imagination. But everything changed when I saw him. Tom was sitting at the kitchen table. His hair was disheveled, his eyes half closed. He obviously knew I was here, but he didn't say a word. He just sat there and stared, his gaze burned through me. I felt my cheeks begin to blaze with embarrassment and shame. I felt like a stranger in my own home. "Good morning," I said quietly, but there was no response. He just kept looking at me, and there was something in that gaze I couldn't understand. The feeling of unease came over me again, like a wave flooding all around me. Tom smiled with the corner of his lips, slow and deliberate, that smile. There was something frightening about it. Anxiety swept over me, but I tried to maintain a semblance of calm. There was an expression on Tom's face that couldn't be mistaken for casual. It was a look in which desire struggled with mystery. Something broke inside me when he said in a quiet, almost whispering voice, "I saw you yesterday." Shock paralyzed me. I have never considered myself a shy woman. Yes, I am 57, and I have long ago got used to solitude, learned to appreciate moments of peace. A house where I could escape the hustle and bustle of the world was my fortress. But after that night, something changed. Tom sat in the kitchen, leaning on the table. I walked into the room, confident in my role as mistress of the house, but the feeling of vulnerability never left me. He was calmly eating his breakfast: scrambled eggs, toast, a glass of orange juice. His face reflected nothing unusual, but that only fueled my inner anxiety more. I poured myself a cup of coffee, trying not to make any noise, and sat down across from him. My gaze fell on the cup, but my thoughts were far away. Doubt plagued me. Should I speak? To say out loud what we both knew was to shatter the fragile semblance of normality. But the silence pressed on. "Tom," my voice was steady, almost businesslike. He looked up, saying nothing. "There's something I need to discuss." He set down his fork, his movements unhurried, but I saw the corners of his lips twitch, as if he were trying to suppress a smile. "Last night," I continued, trying not to flinch, "you went into the bathroom. I heard footsteps, saw you at the door." He leaned back in his chair, raising an eyebrow subtly. "I heard the sound of water," he said at last, his voice as calm as glass. "Thought the faucet was leaking." I nodded, looking him straight in the eye. His explanation sounded logical, but there was something about it that didn't fit. Not the fact of it, but the way he said it. Too calm, as if he'd prepared himself in advance. "Next time, just knock," I said, trying to end the conversation on a neutral note, but his reaction caught me off guard. Tom smiled slightly, almost imperceptibly, and spoke without averting his gaze. "Or maybe I like watching you do it." I froze. His words came out quietly, without mockery, but with a touch of challenge. The awkwardness hit me like a cold stream of water. Tom went back to his breakfast as if nothing had happened, and I felt a lump rise in my chest. A few days passed. Tom and I talked as usual, but tension was in the air. His gaze avoided mine, and his presence in the house felt different, like he was testing boundaries. Sometimes I'd catch him out of the corner of my eye, the way he'd look away quickly, as if afraid I'd say something. I tried to convince myself that it was nothing. Maybe I was being overdramatic, but my intuition screamed otherwise. One evening, as the house settled into its usual calm, I realized that silence is the worst enemy. We were sitting in the living room, me flipping through a magazine and Tom pretending to watch TV. "Tom," I said quietly, but firmly. He looked up at me, wary but not afraid. "I think we'd better talk about this straight, so we don't leave any loose ends." His face remained impassive, but there was a spark in his eyes, a mixture of fear and curiosity. "What you saw," I started, feeling my voice waver slightly, but I quickly pulled myself together. "It's none of your business, but since it happened, I'll explain. Everyone is entitled to private moments, especially if they live alone." Tom listened silently, attentively, almost hypnotizing me with his gaze. "You're not a boy anymore," I added with pressure, trying to regain control of the situation. "You're a grown man, and you should realize there's no shame in it." His lips twitched in the hint of a smile, but he didn't say anything. When I finished, I felt devastated. My attempt to explain myself turned into a strange silence. Tom didn't say anything, just stood up, said goodnight, and left the room. The next morning, coming down to the kitchen, I saw him again at breakfast. He looked the same as always, calm, confident, as if nothing had happened. But this time, when he looked up, I saw something new in his eyes, a cold, almost scrutinizing gaze that made me uncomfortable. It was the look that had haunted me all day. I'd been walking around in a fog all morning. My thoughts, like annoying flies, buzzed around the same thing: Tom. Every glance, every casual touch, even his silence seemed to leave a trace in my soul. I couldn't understand what it was that drew me to him. Perhaps it was his sincerity, which seemed almost childlike, or the way he sometimes, quite unconsciously, revealed his vulnerability. Tom was unusual, but that's wrong, isn't it? I looked for answers in the mirror, scrutinizing my reflection. The lace robe gently encased my figure, emphasizing the lines I still found attractive. The cream glided over my skin, and I watched as my hands methodically rubbed it in, as if trying to erase this inner chaos. I looked better than many of my peers for my age, but I wasn't happy about it now. Something deeper, at the very center of my being, was not resting. When there was a knock on the door, I flinched. I stared at it for a few moments, as if I couldn't make up my mind. But the door opened, and Tom came in. His gaze stopped on me, and I noticed his breathing got a little deeper. "You always look incredible," he said, lingering his gaze on my face, and then a little lower. "It's hard to imagine that you could be more beautiful, but I think you've outdone yourself today." The words hit right on target, making me feel both proud and embarrassed. I pretended to be busy with the cream, but I could feel his presence filling the room. He stepped closer. I felt the warmth of his body before he was even close. His hand gently touched my shoulder, and I felt him adjust the strap of my robe that had slipped down. The touch took my breath away. So soft. He whispered softly, as if he were talking to himself. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. His hand froze for a moment, like he didn't know what to do next either. I heard him inhale quietly, then exhale slowly, as if he wanted to memorize my scent. It was both touching and frightening at the same time. Your scent. His voice got even lower. It's dizzying. You're like spring itself. My heart was beating so hard, I was afraid he'd hear me. I felt like something important was happening right now, but it scared me. Because it was Tom, the same Tom who was looking for answers, to whom I was trying to explain how the world worked. But now he was looking at me not as a student, but as a man. I took a step to the side, trying to create at least some space between us. I needed to think. This whole thing was wrong. Or was it? After all, I'd felt that strange connection between us myself. It was more than simple sympathy, more than physical attraction. It was something that seemed both forbidden and inevitable. Tom, as if reading my thoughts, said, "You have no idea how much you inspire me. Not just by your beauty, but by who you are. You're special." His words burned like a flame. I didn't know what to say and just stayed silent, looking at my hands that were still holding the jar of cream. I could feel my doubts wrapped around me like heavy chains. Was it just my imagination? Or was there really something between us? But even if there was, what should I do? How do I deal with it? And in my heart, I knew this moment could never be erased. Tom and I had crossed the line where things got complicated. Tom sat on the edge of the bed, avoiding looking directly at me. His shoulders were tense, and his hands were clasped together so tightly that his knuckles were white. I watched him, and a strange mix of emotions swept over me. His determination bordering on doubt, his genuine desire to learn and grow. It all seemed both touching and frightening at the same time. "Can you teach me everything you know?" His voice sounded hoarse, as if he struggled with each word. "I want to be better. Better at everything." I didn't answer right away. This moment was too important to rush. Tom wasn't just asking me for knowledge, he was asking me to show him how to live, how to feel, how to be confident. I laughed to break the tension, and leaned toward him, kissing him lightly on the cheek. "Let's start with this," I joked, trying not to show my excitement. "When you're ready, you'll know." He looked up, and I felt everything inside me turn upside down. There was something in his gaze that was impossible to ignore. Mature confidence mixed with youthful timidity. I felt his energy fill the room, every cell in my body responding to his presence. I sat down next to him, searching for words to encourage him. Tom seemed to forget his embarrassment and leaned a little closer, keeping his gaze on me. His hand weightlessly touched my strap, which had slipped off my shoulder again. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "It's accidental." But his gesture was so careful, so heartfelt, that everything inside me literally boiled. I felt a warm wave run over my skin. A moment more, and the air between us was almost tangible. His breath was close, too close. I inhaled deeply, trying to pull myself together. We couldn't cross that line, but somehow the very thought of pulling away felt wrong. Tom suddenly froze, his face changing, as if he'd caught something important. "Your scent," he murmured. "It's like spring." The words broke through the defenses I'd worked so hard to build. I laughed, trying to hide my inner storm. "Tom, smells and feelings are just part of the game," I said. "But the real lesson is to learn to control them. Don't let your emotions take over." He listened intently, as if every word I said was a revelation. I began to tell him about my own mistakes, the confusion I'd gotten myself into, and how I'd learned to deal with myself. I tried to make him understand. Growing up isn't about being perfect. It's about admitting your weaknesses, learning from your mistakes, and not being afraid to be yourself. Tom nodded, his gaze softening. He didn't interrupt, but his face said more than any words. In that moment, I felt something new, not just in him, but in myself. I wanted to show him that life wasn't just a series of rules and restrictions. It's a journey full of challenges and discoveries. When he finally relaxed, I realized that something had changed between us. We were no longer just two people sharing a common room. We had become something more. The connection between us was becoming more and more tangible. Tom started laughing and joking, his tension disappeared, and for the first time in a long time I felt the laughter making me feel lighter, but something inexplicable was bubbling inside me. It wasn't just a rush of energy or emotion. It felt like I was on the cusp of something big, something that could change everything. I couldn't sleep that night, thinking about what had happened. Tom seemed both a mystery and a reflection of myself. His words, his looks, his touch, they stayed with me like a promise. And I couldn't tell if I was ready to fulfill it.